If you've written a draft of your memoir and you want to succeed in the traditional publishing industry, you probably think the next step is to get a critique or pay someone to give you feedback, or at the very least, send it to someone you know for their thoughts. And it's understandable, as this is the method pretty much taught in every writing course out there. You also want to send it out because if it's your first draft or your first memoir or your first book, you probably need someone to tell you you've done a good job with this Olympic feat that is completing a memoir draft. But here's why getting feedback on your memoir draft at this point doesn't work, and what you should do instead to feel good about your work and ultimately write a better draft that you can confidently start submitting for professional publication. Feedback at the wrong stage, particularly with memoir, which is your personal story, experiences, and the meaning that you've made from them, which is pretty much your identity, is kryptonite to a first-time author wanting to get published. It will either leave you feeling more confused or dejected, or give you false hope that this is a manuscript you should start sending out, which is even more dangerous because then you blow your chances of getting it published by sending something when it's not ready. But first, I want you to understand that I've been there. In case this is the first time that you've seen me here, I'm a twice published memoir author and I've worked in print and digital publishing for over 20 years. My first memoir was published in 2010 and my second memoir was published in 2018. But my writing journey started in my 20s when I studied professional writing and editing academically for 5 years. When I studied writing, the feedback model was all that was taught for writers wanting to get their first book published. For 2 years, I workshopped my work on a weekly basis in small groups. I sent chapters and scenes and essays to my teachers, and while it was encouraging to be around other writers and learn more about techniques and hear some interesting writing in different genres, nothing I wrote in that program was ever published. Here's the problem with the feedback model. First of all, people are looking at your work out of context, and you and them do not learn to think about your book from the bigger picture. Workshopping a chapter of the novel or an essay I was writing with other writers only revealed to me the micro details of what worked. Words used, a sense of character in one chapter, that kind of thing. Sometimes you'd read an entire essay you'd spent weeks perfecting, only to have someone say that the name of the person grated on them. Or, if it was encouraging feedback, there was nowhere to go. As in, great, get it published, but how? So that's one thing that was absolutely lacking in that critique model, a sense of greater story structure specific to memoir and getting it published. I wrote many chapters and scenes during that program and smaller essays, but nothing was published and I didn't learn how to bridge the gap between personal storytelling and positioning it effectively for the real world of print and digital consumption. The techniques a writer needs to learn to assess a book-length draft of narrative nonfiction cannot be taught in a small group workshop model where everyone is giving you different opinions on microcosmic elements of your draft. And memoir as a literary genre was not taught in my writing programs, and I do think it's widely misunderstood in most writing courses. Since completing my academic studies, I have published 2 memoirs, but I did not get these books critiqued during the drafting process. Both drafts, the versions I sent to the publishers who printed them, were not critiqued or workshopped or sent off to other memoir writers and editors for review. I taught myself the process that I found lacking in academic and feedback model courses to get a memoir draft to publication standard, and I wrote both drafts in a matter of months. Now, here's why feedback is so dangerous to a memoir writer when it's an early draft and you don't have guidance from someone professionally published in the memoir genre. Firstly, getting feedback on a memoir is tough, much tougher than a novel draft. It's your story and your feelings and your choices and experience, and very often a bit of pain and trauma. First-time memoir writers need to be able to separate the I in the story from the person who has written it. And if this is your first memoir, this is incredibly difficult. To objectively assess the draft, you need to assess it as a separate entity from you. And this is so you can ensure it has the essential elements that go into a compelling and publication standard work. Seeing yourself as a character, seeing the story as a narrative arc, seeing which elements are compelling and which are repelling to a wider audience. You need someone to bluntly tell you a character is unlikable and unrelatable, cut a whole section, this is not relevant. But in my experience, this is not what writers who send their manuscripts for feedback are really ready to hear. You want encouragement and kindness, which is understandable because writing a personal story is tough and you need a hug. So instead, memoir writers end up getting a critique that's vaguely encouraging, or what I had so much of in my program that I did at university, centered around the micro details of chapters and scenes that most likely won't even make it into the finished draft until you learn to assess it like a professional and be your own best revisionist, which is how you learn to master the art of writing memoir. Separating yourself from the story and giving yourself the support in this process that you're desperately seeking from outsiders is crucial. Manuscripts where I have paid for critiques in those years before I got my first book published have never ever resulted in publication, because getting a critique confused my mind around the focus of the narrative and my own creative instinct, more importantly, so much so that I wound up filled with internal noise when I wanted to pick up the draft and rework it. To write a better draft, you need less noise, not more. There is a better way. You can learn the skills to assess whether or not your manuscript works, what to do to bring it to a publication-ready level, and in the process learn the skills that make a memoir author every editor or agent's dream to work with. I wrote a letter from Paris from first draft to submission in 5 months, and I did not get a critique in that time. Instead, I used a specific process that I use for both of my published memoirs, and I teach this process in the art of memoir. It's really the missing piece to what I wanted to learn in academic writing programs. My process works specifically for memoir manuscripts the writer is aiming to prepare for traditional publication. It's a process that covers outlining, setting up your writing routine, resolving the internal conflict that comes up with memoir, writing the draft from start to finish, and then using a professional process to revise the work and objectively assess on your own whether or not it has the makings of a submittable memoir manuscript. When you've got the manuscript to a stage where you have separated the you who experienced the thing from the you who narrates it, you reach a level of mastery in memoir where you've completely reframed your life or a certain chapter of it, because memoir is, in essence, making meaning from your life. This is why it's so transformational. And when you have that draft, you know in your heart that it has a compelling through line, an arc, a relatable aspect that has the potential to move millions of people with your story. Because it's not yours, it's really a global story. And that's why memoir is so powerful to write and read.